Hi, I'm Laraine, and this is Everyday Heroes. Today my guest is Armaiti May. Armaiti May, DVM, is an integrative house call veterinarian and vegan advocate practicing in Los Angeles. She graduated with a BS in Bioresource Sciences from UC Berkeley in 2001. After graduating with her veterinary degree from UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine in 2005, Dr. May worked at an emergency dog and cat hospital and then trained in veterinary acupuncture through the Qi Institute of Chinese Medicine. Dr. May volunteers to help homeless animals monthly. For the past 10 years, she has had a veterinary house call practice for dogs and cats in the Los Angeles area. Dr. May completed her certification in animal chiropractic from Options for Animals in 2015. She has recently founded a nonprofit organization called the Veterinary Association for the Protection of Animals to educate the veterinary profession about the benefits of vegan eating and encourage veterinary schools to offer humane surgical teaching methods to students. Hi, Dr. May. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Today I want to talk a little bit about what you do, and can you fill us in as far as what it's like in the operating room with you when you're working on the animals?
Well, surgery is an important thing to pay attention to, making sure everything is done properly, getting the animal ready for surgery. And spaying and neutering is, of course, something that I've done for over 12 years now as a practicing veterinarian here in Los Angeles. And it's important for prevention of unwanted puppies and kittens who otherwise would often end up in the shelter and not have homes in many cases. So also for prevention of health issues and being hit by a car for dogs that are escaping, looking for a mate. Spaying and neutering is very important. And so that's one of the offerings that I provide to patients. And it's important to make sure sterile technique is observed, proper surgical technique, and having good equipment. As a house call vet, I don't do as much surgery nowadays. I mainly do home visits to people's homes in the LA area. And I don't do surgery at people's homes. I would have to do that at a clinic, of course. But
okay.
Yeah.
And what is it like when you go to people's homes, and what animals are you seeing most of?
Mainly dogs and cats.
Okay.
Wide variety of breeds and temperaments and ages and sizes and everything else. All sorts of conditions, anywhere from healthy puppy checks to elderly geriatric patients with numerous health issues that I'm managing, and then end-of-life care as well.
Oh, wow. Right. What kinds of things can people call you for?
Blood work.
Okay.
I can do a blood test to check complete blood count, chemistry profile, thyroid levels, urinalysis. I can do fecal tests to check for parasites and worms. I also give vaccines when indicated. I can also run titer checks to see if there's adequate antibody levels, in which case a vaccine may not be needed. I just did one of those yesterday, in fact.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I don't want to give a vaccine if it's not necessary. So I'd like to check to see if their antibody levels are adequate.
Sure. And I know you're also a big anti-vaccine advocate.
Well, I believe in choice, and I believe people should be able to make informed choices.
For humans, I should say. Yeah, I don't want to muddle that with animals. Yes. But for humans, I know you've said a lot about how you feel about that. And from a doctor's point of view, how do you feel?
Well, I think that there's a lot of information that's not readily available to most of the public, because in the mainstream media, unfortunately, we see just one side of the story. And that's because most of the advertising dollars for mainstream news comes from the pharmaceutical industry. And that means that the other side of the story doesn't get heard. You don't get to hear about the cases where infants become autistic or suffer from severe allergies, asthma, eczema,
right.
Even sudden infant death syndrome, which has been linked to getting multiple vaccines several days prior to this happening. And with the passage of SB 277 by Governor Brown in 2015, which mandates kids to be fully vaccinated in order to be allowed to go to school.
That's right.
There's an infringement on the rights of parents to make informed choices for their children, which is problematic. So I'm not a parent thankfully, I don't have to deal with that dilemma directly myself, but I do empathize with the parents out there who are struggling with this, whether they have to figure out if they're going to homeschool or somehow get a medical waiver for their children to not have to be vaccinated according to the CDC schedule. I was on the fence about this up until a few years ago. I had kind of heard some rumors about, okay, maybe there's a link with autism or maybe it was debunked, but I wasn't quite sure what the real truth was. And then when I watched a documentary called Trace Amounts, which I just stumbled upon when I was doing some searching online, I was just blown away about how much corruption there is at the CDC in terms of covering up data that has shown very strong evidence of a causal relationship between thimerosal, which is a mercury preservative found in some vaccines, and autism, which is now at an epidemic where 1 in 36 kids
absolutely
is suffering from this condition. And it used to be back in the 80s when I was a kid, it was like 1 in 10,000.
Yes.
So that's an enormous jump in a very short period of time. And that's something that, we can't just continue to keep our blinders on about.
Why do you think they're covering it up, the CDC? Is that money? Is money being passed?
There's a tremendous financial incentive by the pharmaceutical industry to profit from vaccine purchases and manufacturing. And ever since 1986, when the Supreme Court ruled that vaccines would be unavoidably unsafe, they removed all liability from the vaccine manufacturers, meaning that if a child dies or suffers from an adverse reaction to a vaccine, there's no legal recourse against the vaccine manufacturer. Whereas if someone purchased a car that was defective and someone lost their life because of that or become injured because of a malfunctioning vehicle component, that person could theoretically sue the car manufacturer and get some recourse.
Sure.
But that's just not an option in the case of vaccines. So while there is a vaccine injury court, it's taxpayer funded. It's not funded by the manufacturers of the vaccines.
That's interesting.
And it's a very long and laborious process that can take upwards of a decade in some cases.
Why do you think Governor Brown allowed it to pass? Misinformation?
Well, that's a great question.
Financial?
I was disappointed, and
Sure, I think a lot of people may have been.
I was hoping that more of the state legislators would have the opportunity to watch this film, Trace Amounts. And there's some other films that are really good, too, such as Vaxxed, Bot, The Truth About Vaccines, and others that shed light into the profit incentive and also the covering up of scientific information and how things have been distorted. It was very eye-opening to me, especially seeing that there have been cases of kids who've actually recovered from autism with the appropriate chelation therapy, which has to be done very carefully, of course, but it has been shown to be.
And they have to be diagnosed in order then to get this treatment.
Correct.
And
Yeah, so and not every kid is going to be as responsive, depending on the severity of the condition. But to me, it's heartbreaking to have to see a child who had the opportunity to live a full life be denied that opportunity just because a company wants to profit from selling their vaccines. And I just don't think that's right.
Absolutely.
So, whatever I can do to raise awareness and to empower people to speak up and affect change, I'm willing to do.
That's wonderful. How do vaccines affect animals? And are you as discerning with vaccinating animals?
Well, yeah, with vaccines in animals, in dogs and cats, there are certain legal requirements that have been in place for a very long time, such as the rabies vaccine requirement for dogs. And there is now, with Dr. Rob, who has an organization called Protect the Pets, an effort to push more of the titer testing for rabies vaccines. And that can certainly be offered for clients who don't want to have to repeat the vaccines.
Sure.
Or for other vaccines, it's even easier because there's no legal requirement.
Right.
And the other thing that I want to just throw out there is that vaccination is not the same thing as immunization. And sometimes people get those two confused.
Can you tell us the difference?
So there's just one part of the immune system that vaccination is stimulating. And it's not the natural route of administration. When someone is naturally, whether a dog or a human, is exposed to a pathogen in the natural world, it's through oral or nasal or the mucous membranes of the intestines that this pathogen is interacting with our body and then triggering an immune response.
Okay.
An injectable is working in a completely different way, which bypasses those mucous membranes that have to have contact in the natural world. And there's a whole section of the immune system which is not activated.
Interesting. By the vaccination
correct.
That's injected.
Yes.
Now, I've heard it's really important and interesting you bring this up, because I've heard the two words be interchanged.
They are frequently interchanged.
Have you received your immunizations? Have you received your vaccinations? But it's thrown they mean the same thing as far as when many people are just talking in conversation
People
and throwing
often
those words around.
Put them interchangeably, but they're different things, in fact.
That's really interesting. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Are there any immunizations that are injected?
Well, that's a long conversation.
Okay. Now I'm probably overthinking it a little too much.
The vaccinations can be, in some cases, immunizing, but not all vaccines take effect, for one thing.
Okay.
And so checking the antibody levels with a blood test is one way to measure if the immune system has responded to the vaccine.
Got it. That's so interesting. I didn't know there was that clear difference. And it would be great, I think, if everyone could be this informed about what they're putting into their bodies or their children's bodies or even their animals' bodies.
Right.
You know? I mean, just to, rather than, oh yeah, this is just what you do and it's a law by state and this is, your only option. But if we actually knew what we had and what it actually meant, maybe things would be different.
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is you are vegan.
Yes.
How long have you been vegan?
Almost 19 years.
Wow. 19 years ago, they didn't have as much for vegans.
Not as much.
Nosh on. What were you eating then versus what do you eat now as far as like the major differences you've seen?
Well, I was raised vegetarian, I should say, and my grandfather, who came from India, witnessed a pig being slaughtered in Malaysia on the way to America, and from that point onward, he was not wanting to eat any animals.
That was it.
And so that tradition passed on to me, and then when I read about what happened to dairy cows and egg-laying hens, I didn't want to contribute to the cruelty that those industries perpetuate on those animals anymore. And so being vegan has been a big part of my life for a long time, and it's not really hard for me to be vegan at all. In fact, it's gotten a lot easier lately, but in those days, I ate, tofu, beans, rice, corn, lentils, and there were vegan cookies available back then too. I mean, the Alternative Baking Company, and now there are so many more, of course, and so many more vegan cheeses. But I mean, I try to keep things pretty simple for the most part in terms of, what I'm eating, because too much processed food is not a healthy thing on a long-term basis. I think for people who are transitioning to eating plant-based, it's helpful sometimes if they have a craving for a certain food, such as beef or chicken, to try the plant-based versions of those foods that are readily available. But in the long run, switching over to the nature's way of producing food, such as garbanzo beans, hummus, lentils, and brown rice, quinoa, millet. There's so many great recipes out there. Coconut milk, ice cream is delicious. That you can definitely fulfill all your nutritional requirements through these plant-based foods and satisfy your taste as well.
What is the biggest misnomer about being a vegan?
I would say, I think there's a stereotype about vegans being protein deficient, but
yes.
That's probably one of the most common questions.
The anemic, protein deficient. You hear those words thrown around a lot when someone says they're vegan or vegetarian. Yeah. For sure.
And in fact, iron is readily available through plant sources as well. And for those that are anemic, I would just suggest adding in a source of